Welcome back. Today we return to the whimsical world of RLCraft, land of mystery and magic. Specifically, the mystery of how did that dragon see me from so far away, and the magic needed to enable said dragon to fly towards you with the single express purpose of inviting you to join in on the ground floor of its new Meals on Heels startup. They're an entrepreneur, you see, and they think you have a special something that'll really elevate the business. Spoilers, it's your caloric content. But wait, it's not just RLCraft. This is RLCraft Dregora, a new 100% originally definitely not reskin clone of the first version that introduces a frankly nonsensical amount of new biomes and world generation stuff, purpose-built to excite the senses and exhaust your computer. Anywhere your eyes can wander, so too can your feet, provided that the local wildlife cooperates, because it's still RLCraft, and basically everything can and will turn you into violent toothpaste if you give it the chance. Of course, it wouldn't be a Goose video if there wasn't a challenge, so let's get that set up, shall we? The goal of the series is, like before, to get a dragon ring and dumpster the Amalglitch, in that order, in any non-cheaty way I desire. Exploiting bugs is a no-go, abusing the poor sight of the developers is a-okay, all the usual rules apply, blah blah blah. Now for the catch. Thanks to some extensive tweaking on my part and also some modifications I made to the mod pack, that command I just typed has just turned the overworld into the Lost Cities, at least as far as scrape and run parasites is concerned. Parasites will now have the same passive spawn rate, though there are complexities to this that I'll have to get into at some point, the same health, armor, and damage negation buffs, and a fully unlocked spawn table. Anywhere, everywhere, and all the time. As you can imagine, this has less than desirable effects for your life insurance premiums and is probably going to be a little bit of an issue to deal with, but it should be fun. So, parasites are everywhere. What do we do? Well, my first day's adventures hasn't answered that question, but I can certainly talk about things to not do. Things to not do: number 1, try to pimp slap a champion level warden in the water with a flint knife. This was shockingly ineffective, even by RLCraft's already pretty low standards. Also not effective is running away from parasites in Mortal Terror, at least not most of them. They are faster than you, and are more than happy to take advantage of that. Other variants of this similar idea involve remixes, wherein we take the traditional run-and-hide approach, but add in extra bits like putting a bunch of helpless civilians between you and the hungry tentacle demon. It's a little bit more effective, but not by much. Most parasite variants can and will break down everything and anything in their way to get to you, and anything and everything also includes villagers' houses. In certain circumstances, I can fight off individual parasites, even in my ungeared, unskilled state. Of course, for this, the parasites have a counter, which is called Bring More Dudes, which is super effective. XP collection is going to be a little bit interesting this run. My first lucky break comes on life 17, as I spawned directly next to some sort of set-piece thing near some water. I can't stay in it very long, since I am actively being pursued by a high-level thing with way too many arms that can and will break terrain, but I do manage to snag some kit from an armor stand before the mystery arm thing breaks through. The armor is irrelevant, but the axes that stand dropped are invaluable since they let me snag a crafting table on the way out. ArmZ isn't terribly fast, and it also isn't terribly bright, so between the water and kiting it into some trees to slow it down, I'm able to very, very slowly swim away from it and make it to a second set piece nearby with enough vertical mobility that the thing can't get to me. Turns out this particular parasite can't fly, so for the first time since the start of the video, I can actually stop and try and gear myself up a bit by chopping apart the hut that I'm hiding on before bailing onto a boat and running away. Of course, this doesn't solve the other RLCraft problems, like freezing to death, so I am eventually forced to boat towards the shore only to be ambushed by the parasites yanked out of my craft and eaten. It was a good plan while it lasted, but hypothermia and also sea serpents are gonna be a problem. Weirdly, the best luck I had comes from a spawn in one of the new parasite biomes. I don't know what it is about this place, but nothing really seems to spawn here, parasite or otherwise, which makes me think it might be a viable location to do things in for more than 5 seconds. Unfortunately, it also has literally zero grass, water, food, or animals, which means living in it is a tad tricky. and I'm so starved and dehydrated after I finally find water and sand to make some bottles that I had to drink directly out of the river and die of parasites soon after, so there goes that plan. Now, really my only two defenses are, in order, luck and by the second night, the former has finally started kicking in. By sheer dumb coincidence, I was able to keep from aggroing parasites for a good long stretch of time here, and while I was eventually spotted, chased down, and munched on, before that happened, I took out a single infernal zombie that wandered by. This netted me 5 levels of XP, which is just enough to unlock Level Up Reloaded and grab the crafting passive, which I did, before I slapped the points into a broad mix of reskillable passives to save the XP. We are now 35 minutes into the world, and have made our first upgrade. For the next little while, Pyrrhic is the only kind of victory on the table. Death is inevitable, so in situations where I can, I choose to take idiotic engagements in the hopes of getting enough XP fast enough to make even a microscopic amount of progression. For the most part, this does not work, but I have infinite attempts, and every time I get lucky, I get a little bit more capable in my next life. Or at least that's the idea. Well, luck and meta-knowledge. Dying 30 times in the space of an hour has been a remarkably educational experience, and the crown jewel of my multiple doctorates from the School of Hard Knocks is that stealth in RLCraft was overtuned with a flipping sledgehammer. For the most part, mobs in Minecraft don't really have vision, per se, so much as they have ESP within a certain radius of their location, and in the vanilla game, sneaking or wearing the head of a matching mob can reduce that range by a marginal amount. Normally, this is utterly useless in both the base game and RLCraft because stabbing things in the butt with your weapon of choice tends to alert them of your presence regardless of how quietly you do it. But when any engagement means instant death, 0 questions asked, stealth does indeed become a vital part of Metal Gear Online. And it just so happens to be weirdly overtuned. Like, I can literally do explosion-assisted backflips in front of creepers, and they don't notice because I'm crouching. This is not upgraded. This is the base level of stealth. I'm not complaining, mind you, not exactly, but I do wish to point out that it is not supposed to work this well. Of course, it also doesn't matter, because the instant you unsneak, the mobs will spot you, and once they do, you either run and get exceedingly lucky or die, but mostly the latter. By 60 deaths in, I'm starting to get seriously discouraged, because even by the standards of Garden of Grind, this run sucks. At least with Garden of Grind, every time you die represents a comprehensible, tangible piece of progress toward a goal, even if that goal is just building a dirt platform with your body. And I have none of that here. The furthest I have gotten in this game is being able to collect logs, and half the time I even got that far was by abusing lucky chest drops or a village or something that just gave you an axe. It's to the point that I am literally getting killed by my past bodies, and I haven't even gotten to hold a furnace yet. It's only until death 82 that I get a break and spawn in close proximity of some sort of swamp hut thing and a village. I should back up here. First off, biome composition makes a massive difference in terms of my average chances of survivability, even more so than base game RLCraft. In the normal version of the game, if you spawn in an ocean or in the middle of a taiga or something, you're pretty much dead no matter what, just because those biomes are so hostile to starting players that you physically can't get enough stuff fast enough to survive the mobs or the climate. Take all that and add into it the presence of parasites, and you are pretty much guaranteed a reset unless you have a super fast start or are in a biome that is hard for parasites to spawn in. From what I can tell, swamps are pretty much the ideal combination of both worlds. They're mostly water and foliage, which aren't solid blocks and are therefore ineligible to spawn parasites. They usually have easily accessed wood, stone, and gravel deposits, and they aren't too cold or hot. Oceans seem like they might be better by this metric, and maybe they are if you can get your starting tools without going to land, but they also tend to concentrate parasite spawns on whatever solid blocks you are approaching, so they're kind of a one-way trip, and once you're in an ocean, you're pretty much stuck there. And then the sea serpents will just eat you, which sends you back to square one regardless. Anyway, swamp. Pretty good start. The swamp hut is also a nice bonus, because through a convoluted series of shenanigans involving me fist-blasting a mob spawner very slowly, barricading a witch in her own basement, and then smashing a cobweb with a stone club, we can get string without a flint knife. Which means we don't have to go outside and touch grass, which is an activity that has a shockingly high mortality rate. I can then use a couple of signs I stole from the witch hut to break gravel in the bottom of a river for my flint, and am then given a choice. I can either try to sneak into the village and activate the waystone, which will break stealth because I have to uncrouch to click it, or I can try to make my way back to the hut for the night. I opt for the former, both because the waystone gives me a permanent teleport point that is death persistent and I can warp back to from other areas, and because the hut is guarded by a couple Lycanite mobs that have absolutely zero respect for any and all Solid Snake cosplay. As the night falls, I'm eventually able to touch said waystone, and then through a very convoluted series of street sneaking adventures make my way up to the top of a rather tall structure, get a bed down, and finally, for the first time in the series, set my spawn point to a non-random location. Mind you, this is just the start because we are not out of the woods yet, and in fact it actually makes things harder. While I was nomadic, the bulk of the mob spawns were concentrated into an area behind me, and since I was always moving into a safer area. Occupying a space for a long period of time, especially one that is higher than the surrounding terrain, will reverse this effect and concentrate mobs in an area near the surface and near my bed, which makes further exploration even more difficult. Case in point. I also still only have one axe, so when I die, I kinda need to get it back, which forces me to play a certain kind of fun game called Zerg Rush, Paleolithic Edition. My first priority, then, is tools and tool-making materials, because right now that axe is the one thing I have capable of breaking wood, and if I lose it, I am back to square one. Thankfully, this proves to be, well, not easy, but at the very least not as immediately difficult as trying to get established in the first place was. Not being able to stop sneaking for a single second here is the real problem, because it effectively locks me out of any sort of inventory management while I'm in an insecure area, which is everywhere, and makes it impossible to do things like open doors unless I drop whatever I'm holding to hit them with an empty fist. The fact that we're in a defiled biome also makes it a bit tricky to find cobblestone, but I was able to get into the village fast enough that some of the structures haven't been corrupted yet, so I could scrape by enough now. So now that losing a single item isn't going to completely wipe out any meaningful progress I can make, I can afford to start playing a bit of a longer game. Priority 2, then, is getting somewhere to set up shop, which is like getting an axe, much easier said than done. If you haven't noticed, the local ecology has been experiencing something of a minor eldritch incursion as of late, which means that most of the usual housing markets that I would go to for this sort of thing are, eaten. Regular old boring house? Not gonna work. Parasites can dig through most kinds of terrain, and houses qualify as terrain for the purposes of this argument. Fortified bunker house. Also not going to work, because by most, I actually mean anything that is not solid bedrock, and they also have flying and teleporting variants that ignore things like walls, so really bases in general just not a great call. Fortified underground bunker? Sure, it might last for a bit, but being underground is at best a delaying tactic, see previous statement about the parasites eating any and all terrain. And if I get spotted, the parasites can just dig down just as well as they dig sideways, at which point the bunker transforms from a defensive tool to a glorified piñata with goose-flavored candy inside. So no, when you think about it, really the only way to handle this situation is to not let the darn things attack you in the first place, which means building somewhere they can't spawn. And since water is dangerous for its own reasons, that leaves one option. Skybase! Yay! Really well-controlled skybase, to be clear. This is great and all, and would be super easy and manageable to put together if I could actually leave my house. Which, yeah. There's a few people outside, and they just broke my bed. Alright, back to square 0.2. Psych. One of my random spawns, get this, puts me within 80-odd blocks of the village that I just died at, and since I de-rendered it by dying multiple times in a row, all of the mobs are gone. Getting the stuff back isn't easy, of course, and like Knights does spend a not insignificant amount of effort trying to remind me of its continued existence, but compared to completely starting over, this was much better. I did learn my lesson, though. No more weeing around in the village where parasites can spawn. We are getting out of here. Very, very slowly. Like, I need to move my junk literally 50 blocks into the swamp, if that, just so I can get it in a position to start my nerd pull of dubious safety, and it takes so much longer than it has any right to because I'm trying to be stealthy while carrying a chest larger than I am, which gives me slowness 4, while crawling through mud. I never thought this game would make me feel like a bush sniper, but here we are. My first attempt at this faceplants directly into an invisible parasite variant, because of course there's invisible ones, why wouldn't there be? And my next few tries don't even get me close enough to pick up my stuff, but after literally an entire day of slowly sneaking 50 blocks in a single direction, I secure myself a foothold and am able to start the nerd pole. And then immediately start almost freezing to death because I'm 180 blocks in the air in the middle of the night and it's raining. Hello there, simple survival. How nice of you to stop by. No, you may not tell me about your Lord and Savior hypothermia. We've already met. And then eventually, after I kid you not, 3.5 hours of this stupidity, we finally get a bed, a chest, a crafting table, and a furnace all together somewhere that I can mostly use them without instantly dying. Now it's time to start playing the game. And by playing the game, what I actually mean it's time to do is start sneaking around like a little goblin, ganking every single tree I can get my grubby mitts on to turn them into ladders. And XP. It really should go without saying, but I have precisely zero intentions of fighting mobs if I can help it, not because I can't take them out while sneaking, but because the mobs don't know how to sneak, and they will draw parasites in uncomfortably close to me every time they are spotted and summarily executed by something with far too many tentacles to be moving on 2 legs. Paradoxically, under controlled circumstances, it is now actually safer for me to take out parasites than it is regular mobs for that very reason, and I'm even able to successfully axe 1 or 2 of my previous incarnations on the way back from one of my logging runs to get a quick hit of XP. It turns out that parasites, like most other mobs, have next to no idea how to handle themselves in the water. For the most part, they will float generally, and a couple of them do try and kind of dive after you, but that's really the extent of it, and once you add in the mobility debuffs that come from being in water, weaker parasites are just straight up farmable as long as you only engage them in your local Wild Waves theme park. With my ladder to heaven finished and my swamp mildly trimmed, my next day begins with me airstriking myself back down into the swamp and slowly crawling over to the village to loot literally everything that I can get my hands on. Well, yes, sure, I can get XP from individually singling out parasites and slowly beating them to death underwater like the world's most inept alligator. It takes forever, and there is a shockingly high risk of me losing the fight and my XP and then having to start over. So instead, I would much rather steal everything that I can find and craft things with it to get XP instead. This is, as with most things, a one-way trip, and doing much of anything is rendered exceptionally problematic by the existence of such creatures as butterflies, which have very nearly gotten me killed multiple times and do succeed in this venture by baiting a mauler jump directly onto my face. I've said it before, and I will say it again. Stealth is absolutely broken in this game. It also doesn't work with certain mobs for reasons that are unclear. Of course, stealth also has its drawbacks, and one of those is that whenever a tool breaks, I have to spend multiple minutes sneaking away so I can open my inventory and grab another one, which more often than not sees me getting ganked anyway. I had to start carrying multiple redundant copies of tools on my hotbar and enable auto tool swapping to address this, and I foresee tool belts being a valuable addition once I can finally make them, if for no other reason than it lets me swap inventory slots without uncrouching or engaging in weird offhand shenanigans. So after about a day of this, I am, by some measures, successful in my mission to collect random junk, and after all of my dead bodies have been distracted by squid, I am able to sneak back to my ladder and return with a full inventory of treasures that I picked up and couldn't drop, and a chest from my earlier adventures full of mostly the same thing. Sure, for every log there's like 5 random flowers and blocks of dirt and pieces of seaweed or whatever, but that still adds up to like 8-ish useful items in total, which is a whole lot better than it was before. Most of the useful variants of this loot gets turned right back around and putting into expanding my eyrie, though I gotta say, I do think I owe Ducky an apology, because for all of the razzing, the house she made in the Ducky Builds a House video was disgustingly opulent compared to the floating sky trash pile that I'm currently living on right now. My next mission is something of a lark, which is rather off-brand, but we'll go with it. And if it works, it will have a massive payoff. I want to go loot a dragon's nest. Normally this is something that you don't do whilst buck naked, but I have spare tools, and when I inevitably fail, it's fine. I also have a sneaking suspicion that the dragon will have more important things to worry about than me going and stealing a few of its nuggets. My first attempt at this is met with a distraction from a parasite called an incomplete form, which is unique among the species in that it seems to be utterly immune to any and all stealth shenanigans. And for once, this is fine, because they are slow and nearly harmless masses of undifferentiated flesh, and they're easy to defeat even with your bare fists. But this one happens to be a kind of infernal that I can take out without damaging myself, so I opted to go back and stash the silver helm I got rather than risk it on dragon bait. By the time that's over, night falls, and while night is not terribly dangerous from a hostile mob perspective anymore, I opt to sleep it off before I try again anyway. The parasites are remarkably effective at eating any hostile mob that spawns, but some of them have very long aggro ranges, and I have experienced multiple deaths due to a parasite steamrollering through me to get to another mob, killing that mob, spotting me, and then swinging around for seconds, so I'm not gonna risk it. Along the way, I grab some random exposed iron and coal ores, take out another incohate form that spotted me, and am summarily ganked by another one of the named tentacle Steve things before I even get to the nest, despite still being crouched. Alright, fair enough. I suppose mining out an entire ore vein is, a little bit less than subtle. Attempt 2 sees me actually reach the nest, and from there I confirm that the dragon is, extremely distracted. With the exception of a few high-level variants, a dragon's high armor, flight abilities, fire breathing, natural regeneration, and natural hostility to literally anything that moves is a pretty solid counter to most of the shenanigans a parasite can get up to, which puts them in the unusual position of being something of a natural predator. Unfortunately, parasite spawns are infinite, so that doesn't actually make a difference, but it does tend to mightily distract the dragon. This time around, I got spotted by a mangler, somehow, so I just crammed myself into a corner to mostly keep the loot pile together and accepted my fate. We'll be back. Yep, this is why I don't do anything at night. Even surrounded by scrape and run parasites, Lycanites still manages to somehow be the most annoying mod in this pack. Thanks. I really needed that. Attempt number 4 proves to be the winner, and I'm able to pick up most of my junk and bail before the area heats up enough to force me out. I definitely didn't get everything, but the dragon started nosing around the nest again, and I didn't feel like finding out how its AI prioritizes dealing with target-rich environments, so bye-bye! One excruciatingly slow slim and ladder climb later, and I have become the proud owner of 40-ish iron ingots worth of mostly free junk. Normally this would be where I go, huzzah, time to make some armor, but armor isn't really gonna do anything, so mostly this is just gonna get turned into XP further down the line. Speaking of which, I need some of that, and mob farming is out for reasons that should be blindingly obvious by this point, so it's time to get crafting. Which means spam collecting every piece of wood I can get my hands on. Yay! I too love trying to precipitate an ecological collapse while threatened at every turn by homicidal bulls of angry spaghetti. This seems like a really fun and engaging way of spending my time. In the process, I do discover that the electrical pylon structures have blocks of iron I can steal, though, so that's nice. Iron is basically just slow-acting XP bottles for me at this point, so I will absolutely be taking advantage of that. One of the advantages of sneaking everywhere is also that I have plenty of time to pick up literally everything I come across, so I'm never going to be hurting for dirt, either. Such wonderful treasures this game mode provides. And oh hey, look, it's Lycanites being a pain in the butt again.
Winter's grasp. The weather outside is...
I was just thinking to myself, you know what would be really fun, Goose? Tunneling your way back to your base in fear of both parasites and over-leveled Lycanite mobs. Yeah, sure, I mean, it's not the slowest and most ineffective thing I've ever done with my free time, so why not? Anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but I do eventually make it back with most of the stuff I started out with, and a bare minimum of stupid fatalities, which means I have successfully completed the worst part of the game. Back in the hardcore RLCraft series, I made bank off of a level up reloaded perk that gives XP for completing certain crafting tasks. In that version, this was a game changer, since it let me generate large quantities of XP without any combat, and since any combat with parasites will almost inevitably result in my untimely demise and loss of any accumulated XP, that seems like just the ticket here as well. Of course, back in hardcore RLCraft, my preferred crafting loop was torches, since I had access to entire forests worth of wood at the drop of an axe, but here I'm lucky if I can even set foot in one without being turned into creamy vindaloo, so needless to say, bulk wood collection is right out at the moment. No bulk wood means limited torch supplies, and limited torch supplies means no crafting spam. Or it would if you couldn't just place and break the torches to convert them back into their unlit forms. Go Gadget crafting loop. I can now turn flint and steel into roughly 50 points of XP, and all it costs is my sanity. My priorities for this are, of course, sneak speed. Literally just sneak speed. Forget about the rest of it. We're stat dumping sneak speed. You folks have no appreciation for how unbelievably agonizingly slow sneaking everywhere is until you have no other option. It sucks so bad. Effectively, any percentage increase in my sneak speed is also now a percentage increase in my ability to do anything, so that gets first priority, no questions asked. Or, instead of stat dumping agility, I could get ambushed by a parasite that blows up my bed. That could happen too, I guess. Aha! Joke's on them. They forgot to steal the secret lucky horseshoe that I was saving in a personal location. And I spawned in right next to a village with a waystone that I can use to get back, and, oh. Aha! Joke's on them again! I spawned in right next to the same village and can just use a waystone to get back. You fools! You absolute imbeciles! You may have accounted for the first secret lucky horseshoe that I definitely didn't stick up in my You may have accounted for the first secret lucky horseshoe that definitely wasn't living in my prison pocket, but you didn't expect there to be a second one, did you? That said, the suddenly parasite issue is probably something that I'm gonna need to address once I can find or make a waystone in a less spawn-friendly location. There is a random floating tree nearby that I thought was out of aggro range, but apparently not. Incidentally, that's sprint speed putting in work right there. Look at that. I can move a whole 30% faster now. Wowee. Of course, there is one teensy-weensy little drawback with the torch loot plan, and that is that it is cripplingly boring. Like, you thought the sneaking was bad. This is miserable. I spent like 2 hours doing this, and by the time I was done, I felt like I wanted to peel my face off with my fingernails. But it does work, and I got most of what I needed from it. So, progress, but at great personal cost. Anyway, for my next trick, I need to somehow magic up endgame level gear out of nothing. Or, at the very least, dirt, which is easier said than done. The principal issue I'm going to have moving forward is that there is no real way for me to benefit from equipment upgrades until I can survive combat with high-level parasites, because I'll just die and lose it, and there's no way for me to survive combat with high-level parasites without good equipment. So I'm stuck in this kind of weird situation where the only two optimal equilibria are to grub around with junk that I can afford to lose, or become a god of war, but without the wholesome, emotionally constipated fatherly vibe, with zero room for in-between things like smooth power scaling curves. Oh, and also I need to do it without relying on anything that comes from mobs, because they don't tend to stick around very long. I have no idea how to do this, so absent anything more productive, I decided to stick my nose in a cave and see if there was anything worth yoinking. After all, it's not like they're going to be more dangerous than the surface. Really, more than anything, the issue here is the lack of XP. Enchantment setups are easy to get, and the raw resources are plentiful enough to craft gear as long as I'm feeling patient, but not being able to grind mobs for XP is... Wait a minute. Wait one gosh darn minute. Oh, okay. Dang. Never mind. So the idea here was to farm my own corpses for XP, but it turns out to not quite work like that. I'm pretty sure you have to be killed by a parasite to spawn as an infected Steve, so no self-farming for me. So anyway, if mob farming isn't going to work, maybe I can just farm the parasites themselves. Boomerangs are weirdly effective for this since you can reuse them in their projectile weapons, and parasites are worth a pretty decent chunk of XP, so sure, why not? Oh right. That's why. New plan, loot everything I can possibly get my hands on and try to milk resources from all of it, somehow. I never actually looted the village that I was staying at, other than for the little bit that I did when I was running in Mortal Terror and desperately looking for bed, so that's target number 1. There won't be anything super great in there, and I'm forced to haul it all back in a chest since I still don't have enough leather for a backpack, but arrows will be nice to have once I own a bow that's good enough to shoot them with, and I'm sure I can figure out something to do with the rest. Maybe. So yeah, lacking anything else more productive to do, I turned to the RLCraft classic staple, running around like a chicken with your head cut off in search of anything worth stealing. Or in my case, sneaking quite slowly. Getting a flying mount is starting to climb on that priority ranking a bit because the whole stealthy rogue shtick starts losing its luster when the high-value items that you're trying to steal are like peaches, but it does the job. My first target of opportunity is a dragon nest, which is particularly exciting not because of its contents, but because of the glimpse I got of said nest's previous occupant taking a dirt nap in the distance. It would seem the old adage of a grounded dragon being a dead dragon holds true in RLCraft as well. So naturally, I loot the nest and then stop by to try and yoink some easy crop XP before I am bitten in the butt by an invisible parasite and have to spend the entire next day getting back to my stuff. With that obligatory reminder that scrape and run exists out of the way, I return to the set piece, grab all the things I care about, and stash the rest, but not before deciding to check the place out first. And I'm glad I did, because in a bookshelf on the second floor, I find an XP tome, also known as a book that lets you store up to 30 levels of XP, or roughly 1,800 points. While less effective in the late game, these are fantastic for people in situations like mine, where you are constantly being given a small amount of XP, but keep dying before you can do anything with it. Of course, you have to find the book after you die, but still, it's better than nothing. I then run into another unexpected issue in that I couldn't find the dragon. Like, how? How do you miss a giant dead dragon body? It's enormous, and it floats and glitches through the terrain. I literally just saw the thing die in this exact spot not 10 minutes ago. This is not me being crazy, I have it on footage. Side note, at the time I couldn't check said footage without breaking my cover, so I mostly just wandered around aimlessly, but I did go back a second time after I finished recording and lined up exactly where the footage said it died, and it wasn't there. Dragon corpses aren't supposed to despawn, so I don't know if the parasites ate it or it bugged out and phased out of existence or whatever, but it was well and truly gone. In the meantime, all my running around attracted some unwanted attention, so I popped a teleport potion that I stole from a witch hut earlier and bailed. There is no sense risking an XP tome and a bunch of iron for a apparently non-existent dragon. Kinda sucks that I couldn't get the easy scales, but the tome is well worth the potion on its own. And that, I think, is where we'll leave it for today. If you're new to the channel, I have 2 other RLCraft series of marginally less chaotic flavor that you might enjoy, but for everyone else, I will merely say thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.